Hello everyone, it's Cheer, and in this video, I'm going to be going over my top 3 tips on how to prevent blisters and my top 3 tips on how to treat blisters if you unfortunately get some. This subject comes up a lot on our thru-hiker calls every year, on social media. A lot of new hikers wonder about blisters and what long distance hikers do to prevent them, treat them, and all of that good stuff. So let's address it. And just as a disclaimer, these tips are all based off of my experiences in the backcountry on the Triple Crown trails and what I've seen other hikers do. But that doesn't mean it's necessarily the right thing for you. So everybody is different. This is just what has worked for me over the past 5 years I've been long distance hiking and what I've seen work for other people. But at the end of the day, you have to do what is right for you on trail. So let's get into it, shall we? My first tip for preventing blisters on trail: choose the proper shoe wear for your feet. And these are fighting words for some people, so take this as you want. So, trail runners versus boots. Some people love boots. Some people love trail runners. I'd argue more people that are long distance hikers go the trail runner route, depending on the terrain, obviously. If you're in snow, that changes things up a bit. But for normal trail, dry trails, non-snowy trail, I'd argue trail runners are more of the favorite these days. I know back in maybe the 70s, 80s, 90s, boots were the thing. Now it's more trail runners. We'll see if that trend changes again over the years. But what I saw on, especially at the beginning of a trail, so like when I first started the Pacific Crest Trail in 2019, that was my first long distance hike. I was reading online about how hikers preferred trail runners. I couldn't believe it because I love my Danner boots. I still love my Danner boots to this day. They're Vibram sole. I've never had a blister with those. I've hiked up Mount Whitney with those when they were pretty new. So I loved my boots. And that's not to say long distance hikers will get blisters if they wear boots. I know some long distance hikers who wear boots religiously and they don't get blisters. So to each their own there. But what I ended up seeing on the Pacific Crest Trail, where there are a lot of new hikers right out the gate, is the people who wore boots had to get off trail right at the beginning a lot more than people with trail runners for blisters specifically. So I knew quite a few people who were wearing boots. When people start hiking, like the Pacific Crest Trail, for example, it's a little bit warm, like in the desert. It gets cold and warm. I'm a Southern Californian myself, so I know the weather swings a bit. But there were many warm days when I was hiking. So your feet get more hot in boots than trail runners. Trail runners have airflow. It's usually mesh. Boots are usually like a leather or something that's not as breathable. So it seemed like, and what the feedback I got from these hikers was, and a lot of them actually ended up switching to trail runners later after their blister incidents, because I was hiking along with some of them. But the people that I got feedback from seemed to think that their sweaty feet and with the dirt, because it gets dirty on trail, obviously, encourage blisters to form. So I would say just what I've based off of the sample size I've seen in my hikes and what I've heard over the years on our thru-hiker calls, our thru-hiker Zoom meetups, feedback I've been getting from hikers, doing the podcast Q&As, it seems like people tend to get less blisters with trail runners. That's not to say that I haven't gotten blisters with trail runners. So the incidences where I did get blisters with trail runners were road walks, for example. So the Continental Divide Trail has a lot of road walks, like 25-mile road walks in blazing heat. So I have gotten blisters in those situations. I did notice a lot of hikers that would do road walks would get blisters when they normally wouldn't on dirt trail. So that's something to keep in mind if you're doing road walks. You might get a blister or two just because of the asphalt and the terrain that you're on. So the first tip to recap is choose trail runners over boots if you want to go with the trend. But of course, every person is different. Every foot is different. So you have to do what's right for you. But from what I've seen, the trail runners usually win out on blister prevention specifically. My second tip for blister prevention on trail is to choose proper fitting shoes. So first tip is choose the correct type of shoe. Second is make sure they fit. So something I've seen a lot on these trails are people taking off their shoes and they have black toenails, or, they'll have blisters, but they're hiking in trail runners and it doesn't make sense to them. And you have to make sure that your shoes fit correctly. So something that I did that served me well was I tested the shoes before my big hike. And I feel like a lot of people don't necessarily do that. So it's really great to do a shakedown hike with all of your gear before your big trek, your big section hike, your big through hike, or even just a weekend backpacking trip, just to test everything out and make sure everything's going to work for you. Because otherwise, you're stuck with that gear, those shoes for however many miles until the next town when you can maybe swap things out. And that gets expensive too if you have to swap things out on trail. You have to send things home, or you just have to put things in the hiker box, and there goes $50, $100. So before my Pacific Crest Trail hike, my first long distance hike, I went from boots to trail runners, and I made sure to test the different shoes, the different brands. I went through 3 different brands until I found the ones that worked for me. So I tested them out. I got the shoes from REI, and REI is great because even though their prices might be a little bit more expensive, they have a really great return policy. So I was able to test things out, even in the mud sometimes. I tried to clean them up as much as possible before returning them, but they'll take a lot back. And I think you have a year to return things as long as they're in decent quality still. So I did that, and I found the trail runners that worked for me. And I also, this doesn't work for everybody, but maybe try this if you feel so inclined. I got shoes that were a half size bigger than my normal foot size. My feet grew over my long distance hike, over thousands of miles. My feet grew about 1.5 sizes. So some people argue that if you have your shoes in your normal size, so your feet are more confined, they don't have room to grow, that your feet won't grow. That might be true. So you can try that route. But if you do decide to go that route and get your normal shoe size, just make sure you're not getting the black toenails and the blisters, because it might serve you well to go a half size bigger so you have a little bit more room and things aren't really rubbing against the shoe. So to recap, my second top tip for blister prevention is making sure you have proper fitting shoes, proper size. Now, moving on to third top tip for preventing blisters. This is feedback that I've gotten throughout the years through thru-hiker, our Zoom meetups, also our podcast interviews, and through my experience is take care of hot spots early. And I'm going to repeat that. Take care of hot spots early. What's a hot spot? So a hot spot is an area on your foot as you're hiking that's starting to rub and starting to feel a little hot, or maybe start to hurt a little bit. I've had some hot spots that I thought were full-blown blisters because they hurt so much. So once you start feeling that as you're hiking, my advice, and a lot of other hikers also have the same advice, is stop, take a little break, sit down, take your shoe off, and cover that hot spot. So you can pretty much identify where the hot spot is, because it's going to maybe hurt a little bit or feel a little hot. So you have that sensation. So what a lot of people do, and what I do, is I put KT tape over it. So I carry KT tape, and KT tape comes in all different sizes. It comes in different strengths. So some people use KT tape to wrap up, like if they need shin splint support or Achilles tendonitis support. I definitely needed that on the AT. There's different types of KT tape that you can buy. And so the type that I use for blisters specifically are smaller pieces of KT tape. It comes in a black, at least the type that I buy comes in a black color. And it's a little, maybe like 3 to 5 inch piece of tape. And it's almost like fabric, so it moves with your body. So I take the little piece of KT tape that I bring. I might bring maybe 5 pieces in every section, just in case I get blisters or something else that I want to cover. So I'll take the KT tape and slap that over my hot spot and make sure that the edges are flush with my skin. So you kind of rub the edges and it really gets flush with your skin, so it won't come off like maybe a Band-Aid would, because Band-Aids stick out a little bit more from your skin. So Band-Aids aren't usually for me at least, and for a lot of other people, the best route because it'll just rub off. And then you'll have to stop again, take off the Band-Aid, and deal with it. So KT tape works really well for me. It works really well for a lot of other hikers. And I don't personally use Leukotape, but a lot of people love Leukotape. So that's something to also keep in mind and test to see for yourself. So once you put the KT tape on, you would just put your socks and shoes on as normal and then keep hiking. So there you have it, my top 3 tips for preventing blisters on a long hike. The first is choose trail runners. The second is choose proper fitting shoes. And the third is treat hot spots early. Now let's transition into, oh no, I got a blister. Hopefully you guys don't, but it happens sometimes on road walks or otherwise. So I'm going to give you my 3-step protocol on how to treat a blister so you can keep hiking. So my 3-step treatment protocol is clean, treat, and cover. So I'm going to go into each of those now. So let's say I'm hiking along and I feel a blister that is happening. It's not a hot spot, it's probably a blister. Regardless, I would stop if it was a hot spot and take care of that. So if you're not sure if it's a hot spot or otherwise, you could stop and take care of it either way. So I usually would either take a break to deal with it. If I know it's a blister, you could also wait until you get into your tent so you can just relax and treat everything. Or you can wait until you get into town. So if you're on a road walk into town, maybe you might as well wait because the damage is already done. Maybe the blister's popped or it's about to pop. So you can choose whether you want to hike on and take a break at a certain point or get into town or deal with it right then and there. So once I stop, wherever that may be, in my tent, in town, or on a break, I would clean. That's the first step, is clean the area. So as I've mentioned plenty of times before, things get dirty on trail. So usually my feet aren't the cleanest. So I would have to clean my feet. And if things were really dirty, I usually carry wipes with me. So I would wipe everything down if things were really dirty. If things weren't too dirty, I would use an alcohol wipe. So if things are really dirty, first step, wipe the area. Second step, clean it with an alcohol wipe that I usually carry in my first aid kit. So this becomes a first aid kit situation. I carry my alcohol wipes in there, Band-Aids, the KT tape, everything I would need to deal with something like a blister or a cut. If you are in town or if you have access to water, before any of this, you could clean with soap and water if you're in town, or if you have a water bottle with clean water, you can kind of clean it with that. Or if you have a sport cap on your water bottle, you can use that pressure to really clean it. So in wilderness first aid, that's how you could clean a wound, is if you have clean water, you can clean it with that. So you could do that step first if you prefer. I usually just use the wipe. It's usually not that bad, so I usually just use the wipe and then the alcohol pad and then go from there. So cleaning is the first step, cleaning the area. And also don't forget to clean your hands. So you can use the wipe, you can use the alcohol wipe, but if you don't want your hands to get too dry because of the alcohol, you can use your hand sanitizer or soap if you're in town. The second step is to treat. So everybody deals with blisters differently. So some people like to pop their blisters if they're not popped yet. Some people don't and just let it pop on its own as they hike. I find for me, if a blister has not popped, it's more painful than if it has popped. So I usually pop the blister if it hasn't been popped yet. I know this is getting a little TMI gross, but we got to talk about it, right? So I usually pop my own blisters. So if you want to take that route and you don't want it to pop naturally as you're hiking, you can take a sewing needle. I usually carry a sewing needle in my kit. It's great for this purpose, and it's also great if you have dental floss, if you need to sew things up. Like I've had a lot of pants, needing some sewing. There's a hole in something, you can use the dental floss and the sewing needle to sew that up. So that's just a tangent, but another nice thing about carrying a sewing needle. But a sewing needle also acts as the method to pop a blister. So before I do that, I take the needle, I clean it with an alcohol wipe to make sure it's completely germ-free after I wash my hands, and then I proceed to pop the blister. Never a pleasant experience, but that usually takes the pressure off of that area, which is great for me because that means I can keep hiking with less pain. So take that as you want. You can pop it, not pop it, up to you. That's what I usually do and make sure everything is clean. And then I usually carry Neosporin in one of two forms. So they have little one-use packets, or you have a small squeeze bottle that you can buy of Neosporin. So I usually carry Neosporin, and I'll put some Neosporin on there, and that is pretty much all I do to treat the blister. And the last step is to cover. So once I'm done cleaning and treating the blister, I want to cover it if I'm going to keep hiking to prevent the shoe from the friction right against my skin. Again, here's the KT tape coming to the rescue. So I usually put KT tape right on my skin. Sometimes it kind of hurts to peel it off, but it's similar to a Band-Aid. So I usually just use the KT tape to create that barrier in between my skin and my sock and then my shoe. So KT tape is a great way to cover blisters. That's what I do. Some people use the Leukotape once again. Band-Aids, I don't feel like are as effective just because they tend to rub off of your skin. They tend to be less flush to your skin. So being able to have something that's right against your skin that won't rub, because you're hiking all day if you're like a long distance hiker. I usually hike for 12 hours a day or more sometimes. So that's a lot. Even if it's not rubbing a ton, it's the constant rubbing over time that will slowly rub the Band-Aid off. So I found KT tape works great. I know a lot of people like Leukotape. So using that for the hot spot situation in the first section of this, and then now the blister situation if it gets to that point. And just a note about, I know this is cover, but when I'm sleeping at night and I'm trying to get a blister to heal, I will sometimes leave my blister open so it can have the airflow in order for it to heal. So I found that works well for me, but obviously do what's best for you. So there you have it, my top 3 tips to prevent blisters on trail, and also the 3-step protocol in my own words to treat a blister so you can keep hiking. And if you have special ways that you prevent blisters or treat blisters, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. So please leave one if you have some great insight.